Peter Paul van Hoeken, the founder, entrepreneur, leader, CEO of FrontFundr, Canada's leading crowdfunder or something like that. Peter Paul, tell us what it is and what it does.
Thanks, David. Yes, FrontFundr indeed is Canada's leading equity or investment crowdfunding platform. And what that means is that a FrontFundr enables startup, scale-ups, and other growth companies to raise capital from the public. And from the public, that's really essential here, is that we enable companies to raise from anybody that they would like to raise capital from. So as you know, traditionally startups go to put their own money in, founders go to their family, friends, go to angels, perhaps free VCs. So it's a very small group. And what we've done with FrontFundr is basically unlocking a massive group of capital from the public and make that available to startup companies. So anyone, whether you're a small retail investor or you're a wealthy angel investor, everyone can basically invest through the FrontFundr platform. And FrontFundr supports the entire process, from finding companies, learning about the companies and their capital raise, to initiating an investment, completing all the documentation, as well as transfer funds. Everything happens basically digitally through the FrontFundr platform.
And Peter Paul, how long have you been in business, and what's sort of the scale? Do you have one or two companies involved in your website, or what happens if I go to the FrontFundr website?
Yeah, so that's where it started, David, in the early days. In the early days was around 2014 when I started working with or helping small companies to get ready to raise capital. And it was a time that I learned how obviously challenging it is for companies to raise capital, how they also have this, as I mentioned earlier, there's only this small group of the usual suspects to raise capital from. And I thought, there must be a smarter way to do that, and particularly to leverage technology to connect companies with investors. And truth be told, it's not that I invented this, but I've been following also what happened in other geographies, like for example in the UK, where this started 5 years earlier, around 2010. And so I recognized that opportunity, started working with the regulators, because of course we're an investment crowdfunding platform. So FrontFundr is fully regulated by the Canadian securities regulators. And we launched the platform in 2015. So we have been at it for now over 5 years. And in fact, we started with indeed initial 3 deals on the platform, 3 companies. And today we're having a consistent 18 to 20 plus companies listed on the platform.
Wow, that's very impressive. Well done. Great growth. Now, there's been recently a national instrument. I mean, all of these things have very weird names. This one is 45-110. You claim that this has very significant impact on FrontFundr's business. Can you explain how that might be?
Right. Yeah. So the challenge here in Canada with equity crowdfunding has been that, as I mentioned earlier, it's a regulated environment. That's not the challenge. That's actually a good thing. It should be regulated because it protects companies as well as investors, and it basically sets out the rules. But the challenge in Canada has been that, of course, we don't have a national securities regulator. We're blessed with 12 or 13 regulators in Canada, and unfortunately, in other ways on the same page and introduce the same rules. So what happens is that you can sort of a fragmented patchwork of rules, and that has really been challenging to evolve the equity crowdfunding market in Canada. And indeed, you're right. Recently, this is about 3 weeks ago, the regulators, they stuck their heads together and they basically figured it out, and they introduced a harmonized national equity crowdfunding rule. And you're right, those rules typically have a nice 5-digit number. So this new one is the so-called 45-110, and it's called the startup crowdfunding exemption. So what is exciting about this is this, again, it's harmonized, which is fantastic because it creates clarity for companies, whether you're in BC or in Ontario or Quebec. It's the same rule for companies and also for investors. So wherever you are across the country, same rules apply for investors as well. So that's a good thing. It's harmonized. Secondly, what they introduced with these rules is that they advanced startup crowdfunding rules. So those fragmented rules that were already in place. And one of the 2 key changes they made is, one is I would say dramatically increased the limit for companies, the amount that companies can raise. So, and they increased it from $250,000 twice a year, so $500,000 per calendar year, to 1.5 million per 12 months period. Now that's a significant increase, and because that's typically in the range of, you know, $500,000 to 2 million. That's the range where a lot of startups are raising capital. So there always been a sort of a gap there. So it's great that it's been increased to 1.5 million. That's one. Secondly, what the regulators did is they introduced increased limits for investors. So traditionally, if you're a non-accredited investor, so if you basically are a smaller retail investor, you were allowed to invest up to a maximum of $1,500, and that limit basically has been increased to $2,500. If it's permitted suitable for an investor, then that limit is even $10,000. Now, what suitable means is that if companies use this new rule, they have to work with a registered so-called funding portal, which FrontFundr is. FrontFundr is also a fully registered so-called exempt market dealer. And because we are an EMD, means that we perform suitability for each investment. And as I mentioned earlier on, this all happens digitally through the platform instantly. We are able to, if FrontFundr deems the investment suitable, that retail investors can invest up to $10,000. Now, if you're an accredited investor, there's a separate rule for that. And so in FrontFundr, what we do is an accredited investor come through a separate rule, so basically have no investment limit. So we can basically combine all those rules through our platform.
Wow, that's very exciting stuff. So it helps the companies, they can raise more money, helps the individual investor to be able to place more money, and it's uniform right across the country. Peter
Totally.
Paul, that's a very exciting development. I hope that everybody who sees this will just sort of dial into frontfundr.com and see what's there, and possibly there'll be something you will find of interest. Oh, and by the way, Peter Paul, in case you hadn't picked it up, I am the chairman of your board.
Oh,
Thank
are
you
you?
very much. Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
David. Thank you. Bye-bye.